manna from heaven was described in a way that truly seems magical. They said it fell from the heavens overnight with a little bit of moisture, and it arrived in a sort of self-contained envelope that was a little bit rough on the outside, like coriander. They described it as being like bread, and as having a sort of wafer-like appearance. But they also said it could taste like nearly anything. If you just focused your thoughts on a particular craving, then the manna could assume that approximate flavor. Except for things like spices, apparently. But that's not all. They also said it came with lots of jewelry. But if you didn't collect it before the heat of the day came, then it would melt and start turning into water. And lastly, probably my favorite aspect of all here is this. It was also said to be so constitutionally perfect that it would completely be absorbed and your body would fully incorporate it. Wow, that is quite the amazing characteristic. So it's just this perfect little heaven bread that comes in its very own little wrapper, and it can taste like nearly anything. And it's also perfect for the human body. And it also comes with lots of jewelry. If all of that wasn't phantasmical enough already. Wow, that's incredible. That is quite the elaborate tale of fantastical space food, Jews. It's almost too good to be true, if I'm being honest. I mean, I'm almost a little bit skeptical of a few of these details here. And normally, I would be. But I know this story is a little different. I know this story was written down by Jews. And a Jew would never lie. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. This was no tall tale. This was an actual historical account of a supernatural phenomenon. This was a genuine, scientific report of an otherworldly anomaly. How do I know? Well, it makes me feel good in my tummy when I think about it. No, not really. I actually know because of how insanely precisely they described it. The entire Exodus story is all one big, interconnected phenomenon. They recorded it perfectly. It's like an encryption key, and a cipher, and a fingerprint all matching inextricably, and at precisely the same time. And the miracle of all of this drama was in how mind-bogglingly perfect all of their timing always was. Yes, that's right. It was all scientific. So, get ready to be disappointed. No, not really. It was awesome. So get ready to be stoked. Yes, indeed. This was all the work of some unseen force acting through Mother Nature. Why else do you think the Hebrews kept rebelling? Do you really think they were just that inexplicably ungrateful? No, no way. For all they knew, this was just a bunch of crazy coincidences. That is why they just kept rebelling constantly. That is how I know. That is how I know this was all an act through Mother Nature. They kept rebelling. That is the proof. So, what kind of food item can we actually find out in nature that can even make sense of all this? This seems like a pretty tall order with all of these fabulous, miraculous attributes. And I'm not sure pine cones are fit for purpose at this point. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to wake up. The manna which fell from heaven was none other than nature's very own original fondue ravioli. That's right. The descriptions of the manna which fell upon their encampment were unmistakably describing oysters. The Hebrews were precisely describing oysters. Oysters, as I'm sure you're aware, come in their own little envelopes, just like manna. And they are indeed like the rough exterior of a coriander seed. They hermetically clamp their little shells together as soon as you harvest them. But if you started to rain them down all over the desert, then they would eventually start to cook. And then that would pop them open and allow their water to be released. And then this, of course, would appear like they were melting. This is why they would melt, as they said. But you could still cook them and obviously heat them up without them melting. And this is why the manna would also start to spoil after only about 24 hours in those balmy desert conditions, despite being some sort of magical heavenly super bread. Without a source of cooling, a raw, unopened oyster out of water is inherently going to have a very limited shelf life. Something I'm sure a fancy artisan space bread would not be very likely to exhibit. But what about this claim that they could taste like almost anything? Surely this was a magical quality, right? I mean, how could any natural food just taste like anything? Well, as every good oyster connoisseur knows, oysters themselves can and do taste like almost literally anything. And unlike wines, you don't just cleanse your palate before you try a new oyster. You must also cleanse your mind. And oysters, uniquely, have such a rich and eclectic array of improbable nuance that they can easily invoke the patina of things like honey. This is well within their range as a pantheon of subtlety. And this is essentially why the Hebrews conceived of manna as being very bread-like. But alas, the one thing that they cannot do is taste like spices. They simply cannot produce the flair of certain sharper herbs like pepper. So once again, we have a very unambiguous concurrence. This is exactly what the ancient Hebrews were so adamantly attempting to recount for us. And without a doubt, the most astounding of all of these features has got to be their nutritional profile. They are, in fact, the most nutritionally perfected superfood on the entire planet. You can literally live on oysters, and only oysters, indefinitely. Just throw in a couple spices and the occasional citrus, and this is precisely what your body was nutritionally designed for. And of course, oysters are a quintessential marine food, so they inherently contain those precious brain-supporting nutrients. You know, the ones your body really needs, so you don't end up losing some major IQ points in those landlocked areas. Well, the oysters have got those IQ boosters by the truckload. So, yes, to conclude that entire discussion there, these oysters can be completely absorbed when you eat them. People used to come to New York from all around the world, and they would famously just sit there and eat their world-famous New York oysters by the bushel without ever really perceiving that they had actually eaten too much. Precisely like the Hebrews described the manna. Yet another miraculous quality which is entirely conceivable. And what's potentially even more astounding, when you really think about it, is that oysters, in and of themselves, are also extremely ethical. They are 100% a meat source, that much is certain. But they are also, amazingly, non-sentient, which makes them ethically unimpeachable. So, literally anyone of any persuasion can still consume them and not feel guilty about it. And if all that wasn't miraculous enough somehow, then yes, they literally also come with their very own jewelry inside. Not only might you find the occasional pearl in one, but their actual shells themselves are also that beautiful white iridescent pearl nacre. Exactly like what the Egyptians would often feature in their jewelry. And I know that they say, regarding the actual archaeology, that there just were never any slaves in the lands of Egypt during this time period. But the fact that they didn't even know what an oyster was would be exactly what one would expect from a very lowly slave class. This is why those wayward desert Hebrews could only recognize this as jewelry. And this is also why they ended up rebelling and started worshipping idols and stuff. After all those many years of total subjugation, you would almost literally be like a freshman from an overbearing household. You would have never even had the opportunity to simply develop your very own internal self-control mechanisms. So, as soon as they turned you loose, to finally send you off to college, unsupervised, you would just totally lose your mind and start doing keg stands and worshipping cows and stuff. And of course, oysters are indeed a perfect human supplement. So, they have always had the power to inspire a sort of exuberance in people, if you know what I mean. So, it's like, seriously, What do you seriously think is gonna happen when you start seriously plying these poor malnourished refugees with a bunch of magical melting coriander jewelry food? You already know. You already know. I ain't even gotta tell ya. You already know. And as far as all of this business about these archaeological findings not appearing to offer support for any of this Exodus stuff, well, just move the dates back a couple centuries and God's your uncle. God had to keep these dates classified so he could throw you this surprise party. If he would have told you any more, he would have had to kill you. If indeed it is true that manna was actually oysters falling out of the upper troposphere, then how in the ever-loving heckfire did they actually get up there? Well, they got up there the same way a lot of aquatic organisms do. Through waterspouts. Waterspouts are just these tornado-like vortices on the ocean. It's just a bunch of hot warm air trying to poke its way back up from beneath those cooler layers. And as it rushes towards that opening, it starts to spin. It's essentially like a dust devil in the desert, but a lot more powerful. The ancient Hebrews actually witnessed this firsthand. They saw a giant pillar of clouds that came between them and the Egyptian army. Well, this pillar of clouds was also delivering them their manna. It was chucking these massive amounts of oysters up. And then the trade winds were just arcing them out into the desert. This sort of thing happens all the time, on a sort of random, anomalous basis. But it's usually with things like fish, and they just come raining down on some poor, unsuspecting village somewhere. But then that just begs the question, what in the world was the initiating force behind all of this? And how in the world was this ever able to continue for so long? Well, let's see if we can get some more clues from everything they told us. They said that they were following a pillar of clouds around by day for 40 years, and a column of fire around by night for just as long. And they said they were always beneath the shade of the clouds of glory. And when those clouds would move their shade, they would just pick up and go with them. Interesting. A bright, luminous column of fire, you say? Interesting. I wonder what might have caused that. Well, if you had had a magnetic excursion event right above that coastal area, then that would have definitely caused that. Where the Earth's magnetic field is effectively weakened, at least in that one specific area. And then that fire would have also meant that a whole bunch of extra solar energy was just pouring directly down into that region. And then that energy would have also explained why there was all of that extra heated air down there driving all of those massive water spouts. And then that anomalous heating from the upper atmosphere would also be causing a very dramatic high-pressure system. And then that incredible spike in local pressure would of course be pressing out on everything, especially against the ocean beneath that oculus. Whenever there's a hurricane that's making landfall, if it's big enough, it'll also drag the ocean up onto the land with it. And that's because it's pulling it up with its siphoning low pressure effect. And of course, its massive winds are also pressing the bulge even higher. But that's what tends to happen with a major hurricane. Well, our inverted system out there in the desert would be having precisely the opposite effect. This pressure would be crushing down the ocean. And then the winds, of course, would be blowing radially outwards and magnifying this effect. In other words, this would be massively depressing the local ocean. It would be splitting the sea apart in a giant bowl shape. And if the bottom was fairly accessible, it would expose it and then dry it. Precisely how the Hebrews described it. So it was all connected. The splitting of the ocean and the emergence of manna. And by pressing the ocean down, it would be exposing those oysters. Oysters that used to exist by the billions before modern harvesting. But then this still begs the question of how this aurora borealis effect even happened in the first place. Well, this is where it gets interesting. what causes the auroras to begin with? Might it be from the solar winds striking our magnetic field, and then those particles traveling along the lines of flux until they finally get funneled into a point where the Earth's magnetic field is bending inwards? Indeed it is. So, something must have been causing our magnetic field to be dented inwards around this Red Sea area. So something must have been distorting our normal magnetic field pattern. Which means that something within the Earth must have been flowing in a different direction. Which means that something of an unknown extraction must have been distorting the way our inner Earth magma was flowing. But what exactly? What in the whole wide world could have initiated that type of flow disruption? Well, there was a massive cataclysmic volcano around this time period. Does that count? It was one of the biggest and most destructive in all of history. And it was right across the Med, just south of Greece a little. It was about 5 times more powerful than Krakatoa, and it was believed to be the single most percussive event ever experienced by any human beings in all of history. So that sounds pretty big. There were obviously lots of things going on inside of the Earth at that point. Lots of things being jostled and moved around. So, yeah, that could definitely have caused a major magnetic field distortion. But we can even take this one step further. Whenever that volcano erupted, a very large amount of magma within the Earth would have been rushing up and attempting to escape through that upward flowing channel. And just like pulling the cork out of a bathtub, all of that liquid that was rushing to escape through that exit would have been spinning as a natural result of this and creating a vortex. This rotating motion could have very easily continued to spin along down there for a very substantial length of time after this. Especially if the volcano continued to effuse. This could have easily lasted for decades. And then this spinning motion would have created a macroscopic dynamo effect. And then this dynamo effect would have created a mega-sized magnetic field around it. And then this field would have created a major distortion within the overall planetary magnetic field, which itself would have looked like a massive funnel-shaped depression in the Earth's magnetic field, way down there deep beneath this volcano, and shifted slightly downstream to the south a little, just like water flowing downwards over a boulder. And this depression would have also caused every single layer of the Earth's magnetic field up above it to be dented down and inwards, like the layers down beneath them. But these divots in the Earth's magnetic field lines would have also been offset and shifted southwards as you moved up higher and higher in elevation. Every single wrinkle in the magnetic flux lines would be further and further southward as you rose up from that underground hurricane and up into the ionosphere. So, it would basically look like a ladder, projecting upwards and to the south. But the Earth's magnetic field doesn't just flow from the north to the south in a nice homogeneous pattern. No, it actually deviates quite significantly depending on your location. And it also meanders quite a bit and moves around a lot. So it very easily could have been pointing in a more easterly direction during this time period. And so the magnetic shadow of this underground hurricane was likely projecting towards the south, but also east of there. So, if you follow this line up and to the south and to the east from there, by the time you get all the way up to the upper ionosphere, it places you right about in this area between Egypt and Arabia. It places you right about in this approximate location above the Sinai Peninsula. So, you've got a volcano going off, and then this creates a hurricane in the magma down beneath it. And then this creates a dynamo effect and a magnetic field throughout this region. And then this creates a magnetic shadow that projects all the way up until it reaches up above the Red Sea area. And then this causes a major funnel-shaped depression in the Earth's magnetic field up there. Every single phenomena within the Exodus account was the result of some sort of seismically induced distortion in the Earth's magnetic field above this area. Their descriptions of it are far too precise. So, there you have it. The seismic activity causes everything. The plagues which descended upon Egypt, which are all known to be side effects of limnic eruptions. The pillar of fire that directed Moses to the location of the Red Sea crossing. The splitting and the corresponding drying of the Red Sea ocean channel. The column of clouds that came between them and the pursuing Egyptians. The releasing and the subsequent collapsing of the Red Sea upon the Egyptian army. The pillar of fire in the night sky that guided them after dark for 40 years. The pillar of clouds beneath that fire that also gave them shade in addition to guiding them. The manna from heaven and the water from the watersheds that completely sustained them for an entire generation. And also every other phenomena, from the events at Mount Sinai to the destruction of the fortress of Jericho. And if you were like me, you basically had no recollection of any of those other Sunday school stories. So let's talk about it. So, just a few days after they made it through the sea crossing, they eventually came to a mountain in the deserts of Arabia. They referred to this location as Mount Sinai. And at Mount Sinai, a powerful thunderstorm started to gather around it. And then a towering column of fire came and descended down upon it. They said that there was a smoke that began to rise up and issue forth from the mountain. And then the mountain all around began to rumble. And then a massive heavy horn began to blast from it. So, by now, I'm sure you can guess where this is going. Yes, that's right, this is our Aurora system. This was that unfiltered solar wind energy, just blasting right down through that portal. But then how did it get all the way out there to Mount Sinai? Well, the Earth's magnetic field is actually dynamic. It likes to move around and just sort of meander. So of course, as the field was doing this, it would be moving that system around, and also changing its intensity and modulating it. And this would be a perfect way to strategically aim that thing around its stuff. You could place it right over that entire mountain and cause it to resonate and tremble. You could place it right over the city of Jericho and cause its walls to shake and crumble. You could place it right over the River Jordan and cause its waters to split apart for them. You could blast a bunch of particles up into the atmosphere and eject them up so high that they ended up forming hailstones as large as boulders. And then you could arc those boulders over right onto the Amorites. And then you could crank that corona system up for a grand finale, and you could ignite that auroral blaze and turn the night into day for them. And then the Hebrews could conveniently use that to finish their battle against the Amorites. And as far as you could tell from the battlefield, it could appear as though the sun and the moon were standing still. So, there you have it. Absolutely everything that the Hebrews claimed they experienced could have so easily been the work of this one single phenomenon. Well, what about Moses and his burning bush? Surely that must have been embellished, right? I mean, how could a bush just start burning but then just never consume its own substrate? How is that even possible? Did Moses just accidentally ingest some mushrooms or something? Well, no, I'm pretty sure he didn't. In fact, I'm pretty certain that this entire event was just some good old-fashioned St. Elmo's fire. St. Elmo's fire is one of the coolest and most elusive events in nature. It happens when there's a charge difference between the objects on the ground and the air around them, and when the air itself has some sort of frost or dust in it, and when the air particulates themselves can accept that charge directly into them. So this is a charge that actually wants to get out into those ionized air molecules. It actually wants the air that's all around it to absorb its electrons. It's not just a charge up in the clouds wanting to arc its way out in a single discharge. No, it's a difference between the ground and the actual air column, and it wants to get out, into it. And so this charge will tend to seek the highest objects. It'll essentially accumulate atop the objects which are the most like antennas. So it'll accumulate in things like trees, and mountaintops, and in the masts of ships at sea out on the water. And then this is when it really gets interesting. Whenever that charge begins to get heavily concentrated up there, it just erupts out into the air like a hissing blue electric fire. It's just this jet of effusive sapphire plasma like a whispering indigo ghost flame. And what's more is that it never actually heats up its substrate or ever burns down its structure. It just fizzles directly off of its most elevated extremities. Oh, and I almost forgot, this phenomenon is usually caused by either a weather anomaly or by a disturbance in the underlying seismology. So there's that seismic activity again. And they said that Moses had actually witnessed this mystery plasma, issuing forth from a thorn bush, amidst the slopes of a local mountain, in an area known for its volcanic activity, at essentially the exact same time as all of this other stuff was going on. So, there you go. Perfect recipe for St. Elmo's fire. Oh, and it even says that the bush actually told him to take his sandals off, because the ground on which he was standing was holy. Well, that's a pretty lucky break that the bush actually took him aside and mentioned that. Because if it didn't, then the electrical potential in that ionically supercharged thorn bush would have reached out and touched him. And it wouldn't have been a nice touch. And then the Exodus might have ended, before it started. So, there you go. Absolutely everything they claimed they saw was all related to this one single era of seismic activity. From the bush, to the plagues, to the parting of the waters, and from the manna to the events at Mount Sinai. And then the sun even appearing to stand still. It was all connected. And it was all so intuitive. And they described it so perfectly. Like an encrypted treasure map. Touché, my ancient Hebrews, touché. You win this round. I'll give you this one. But you owe me. And the fact that they just kept having all of this absurdly impossible luck with all of these events taking place is essentially your biggest clue that there was something a bit more peculiar going on. If you know what I mean. Touché, my burning bush, touché.